Welcome to a journey into one of the most unsettling mysteries ever whispered about in the Ozark Mountains. And before we dive in, go ahead and share in the comments where you are listening from and the exact time you pressed play, because it is always fascinating to know when and where these stories reach people. On the western edge of the range, beneath the shadow of Tumyam Mountain, stood a lonely cabin that townsfolk eventually refused to even acknowledge. Records in Shannon County, Missouri, still show a deed dated 1873 for 40 acres purchased by a man named Josiah Williams. Yet, after the spring of 1889, the family's name vanishes from every ledger and church record as if erased on purpose. The place sat about 7 miles outside Eminence and could only be reached by a twisting dirt trail through thick oak and hickory woods. What occurred there was so disturbing that generations of locals chose silence over memory. It wasn't until 1957 that a University of Missouri historian named Dr. Lawrence Pritchard stumbled across sealed testimonies hidden in the courthouse basement in Shannon County. His findings were never published, and his notes were locked away in 1961, with the university refusing to release them ever since. Still, those forgotten testimonies give a grim glimpse into how the Williams family slipped deeper into isolation while the community watched from a distance, unwilling to interfere, though they sensed something was terribly wrong. According to county land records, Josiah first appeared in the area in the fall of 1872, staying at the lone boarding house in Eminence for nearly 2 weeks while scouting land. The innkeeper, Sarah Jenkins, later remembered him as courteous but withdrawn, often returning after dark with jars of soil and water he had gathered. He revealed almost nothing of his past, only saying that he had come from Illinois after unfortunate circumstances and was looking for a new start for his wife and children. When asked why he chose such a remote 40-acre tract land abandoned years earlier by a trapper named Harlan Moss Williams, said he needed privacy for his family's peace of mind. He paid in full with old gold coins worn smooth from use. What he either overlooked or already knew was that the land had a reputation for unease. The Osage refused to guide anyone near it, calling it the place where the ground speaks. Moss himself had abandoned his cabin in 1868 after claiming something was rising from the earth beneath him, and he vanished after leaving for St. Louis. Josiah brought his family back in the spring of 1873. His wife Martha, their daughter Elizabeth, aged 14, their son Samuel, aged 10, and their infant Thomas, and together they settled into a cabin whose story would be swallowed by silence for decades. The Williams family arrived in a covered wagon carrying modest belongings, tools, household goods, and several locked trunks that locals noticed were unusually heavy. They stayed at the boarding house in Eminence for 2 weeks while Josiah built a temporary shelter on their land. Sarah Jenkins, who kept the boarding house, recorded one of the earliest accounts of the family in her journal. She wrote that Martha Williams barely spoke and kept the baby covered at all times, even when no one else was around. The woman tends to the child with mechanical precision, Jenkins noted. Yet I have never once seen her smile at it or speak a tender word as mothers usually do. She also described Elizabeth and Samuel as unnaturally subdued children who spoke only when spoken to and spent long hours staring quietly out the window toward their new property. What unsettled her most were their strange sleeping patterns. The family always retired early, yet would rise at odd hours of the night, moving about their rooms at 2 or 3 in the morning, pouring water again and again. By sunrise, they appeared rested as if they had slept soundly, though Jenkins was certain they had not. By the summer of 1873, Josiah had built a permanent 2-room cabin, using his carpentry skills but with features that struck neighbors as peculiar. The walls were unusually thick. The windows sat high beyond easy reach, and the root cellar was sealed with a heavy door secured by multiple locks. Store ledgers from local merchants confirm his purchases of the timber and hardware, For such work, along with unusually large quantities of salt, far more than any ordinary family would require for food preservation. During their first year, the family kept almost entirely to themselves. Josiah came into town once a month to buy supplies, sometimes bringing the older children along. Elizabeth briefly enrolled at the local school where records describe her as intelligent but withdrawn. Her attendance soon grew irregular, and her last day in class was in November 1873. Teacher Abigail Foster kept a journal noting that Samuel often appeared exhausted and startled easily at sudden sounds. She grew alarmed by the strange themes in his schoolwork. Again and again, his composition spoke of things moving beneath the earth and voices calling from below. One entry, preserved from October 12, 1873, reads, "At night the ground breathes beneath our house. Father says not to listen, but I cannot stop. Elizabeth says the breathing calls our names. Neither child ever joined community events or made friends. When Elizabeth was invited to a harvest celebration that October, she quietly told a classmate, 'We cannot leave Thomas alone with what watches from below.'" Martha Williams was rarely seen in town, and over the years of the family's residence, only 3 documented appearances were ever recorded. The first came in June 1873, when she purchased fabric and sewing supplies from Mary Thornton's shop. Thornton later noted in her ledger that Martha had insisted on buying every mirror or reflective surface available, though she refused to look at any of them herself and wrapped each in dark cloth before leaving. Months later, in December of that year, the local physician, Dr. Harrison Miller, was called to the Williams property, where Josiah claimed his wife was suffering from nervous exhaustion. Miller's notes reveal that he was not permitted to examine the infant, though he distinctly heard troubling wheezing from the curtained cradle. He also observed that Martha, though frail in appearance, displayed unnatural strength when agitated and had to be physically restrained by her husband when the doctor attempted to approach the child. Most troubling of all were his impressions of the cabin itself. The walls were marked with strange symbols that Josiah explained away as his daughter's drawings. Yet they appeared deliberate and concentrated around doors, windows, and especially the locked root cellar. Small bowls of salt had been placed in every corner of the cabin and across each threshold as if forming a protective barrier. By the summer of 1874, the family's behavior grew even stranger. Josiah began digging a well, but not beside the cabin where most homesteaders did. Instead, he chose a clearing nearly a quarter-mile away, hidden in thick undergrowth. A surveyor named James Cooper and 2 hunters separately recorded the odd placement and Josiah's explanation that water tasted sweeter in that spot. But Cooper's official notes filed with the land office contained a peculiar line cautioning that the site lay above no known spring or water table, and that the project was inadvisable. He added that the Williams children were seen watching silently from the tree line, while a woman's voice carried through the woods singing a wordless lullaby. What Cooper left out of his report, but later confessed to Dr. Pritchard decades later, was an encounter with Elizabeth Williams. As he departed the property, the girl met him at the boundary and whispered, "Father isn't digging for water. He's making a door that opens both ways." When Cooper pressed her for meaning, she smiled in a way he described as unnatural, as though she had studied the gesture rather than felt it, and added, "Thomas needs to talk to what lives in the deep places, and it needs to talk to us." By autumn of that year, the well was complete, and Josiah began selling the water in town as a curative. Locals called it Williams Spring Water, and several merchants, including William Pierce, recorded sales to customers who swore it eased digestion, sharpened thought, and quenched thirst in a way ordinary water never could. One customer of the Williams water, an elderly widow named Constance Murray, claimed its effects went far beyond improved health. According to church records, she said that after 3 days of drinking the water, She began having dreams so vivid that she could speak with her deceased husband as if he stood alive in her room. Murray purchased the water every week thereafter until neighbors reported she began speaking in two voices at once and was soon taken away to live under her daughter's care in Springfield. The winter of 1874 into 1875 brought brutal cold to the Ozarks, and many families near Eminence moved into town for warmth and safety. Yet the Williams family stayed put at their isolated homestead. Reverend Isaiah Blackwood, troubled by rumors, tried to visit in January of that year. His journal describes finding the narrow trail to their cabin completely clear of snow, though the surrounding hills were buried deep. He saw smoke curling from the chimney, but no one answered his calls. As he turned to leave, he caught sight of a figure behind the cabin, too tall to be a child, moving with a strange jerking stride before vanishing into the trees. Blackwood later admitted, in a private letter to a colleague in St. Louis, that he felt an overwhelming sense of wrongness on that property. He wrote that the very air seemed heavy and resistant, carrying an odor like the mineral springs near Alton, but reversed as if the land itself were being pulled downward. He noted the silence most of all. No birds, no insects, and even the wind seemed to halt at the boundary. When spring finally came, Josiah returned to town with more than water to sell. He began offering furniture of his own, making finely built but unsettling in its design. There were chairs with uneven backs, cabinets with secret compartments, and tables inlaid with patterns that seemed to shift when looked at too long. Despite their strangeness, the pieces sold quickly. Carpenter Thomas Jenkins examined one table closely and recorded in his trade journal that though the wood appeared to be oak, it was unlike any oak he had worked with in 3 decades. He wrote that the grain looked altered, and the patterns inlaid on its surface seemed to shift when glimpsed from the corner of the eye, creating a sense of depth where none truly existed. Around this time, Elizabeth Williams stopped attending school altogether. Teacher Abigail Foster, worried by the girl's absence, visited the cabin in April 1875. She found Elizabeth alone inside, cleaning the floor with nothing but clear water. The girl's speech was fragmented, and she referred to her youngest brother only as the other, rather than by name. When Foster asked about Martha and the baby, Elizabeth grew visibly upset, insisting they were at the feeding place and could not be disturbed. Foster's journal that day noted a disturbing change in the girl's appearance. She had grown taller in just a few months. Yet her movements seemed awkward, as if her arms and legs lagged behind her, intent by half a beat. Elizabeth's appearance unsettled Abigail Foster even more on that April day. Her skin had taken on a pale, waxy tone, and her eyes no longer seemed to focus on the person before her, but instead on something distant that no one else could see. As Foster prepared to leave, the girl gripped her wrist with startling force and asked, "Teacher, do you hear it?" The humming from below. When Foster answered no, Elizabeth nodded as if satisfied and whispered, "Only those who drink see only those who drink here. Father says we mustn't tell what comes up through the well at night. But Thomas says secrets are a child's game." Then she released the teacher and calmly resumed cleaning as if nothing had been said. On her way out, Foster glanced back and saw Elizabeth walking with a strange, lurching stride toward the woods, despite insisting moments earlier she was forbidden to leave the cabin. Troubled, Foster went to Reverend Blackwood, who brought his concerns to Sheriff Thomas Kincaid. Yet no law had been broken, and in frontier Missouri families were allowed wide privacy. Still, the sheriff directed his deputy Robert Hayes to keep an eye on Josiah whenever he came into town. By the summer of 1875, Samuel too had stopped attending school. When Hayes questioned Josiah during a supply trip, the father explained that both children were needed at home to help expand the cabin and care for Thomas, whose health remained delicate. Hayes noted that Josiah no longer looked the same man. His once tidy appearance had given way to clothes stained with chalky mineral streaks. His hands were raw with blisters, and his speech had slowed into a careful cadence, as if each word had to be chosen with intent. Around his neck hung a crude pendant made from riverstone marked with shifting striations that seemed to move when viewed from different angles. When Hayes asked about it, Josiah only placed his hand over it and said, "It keeps the balance between above and below." That September, a hunting party tracking deer passed near the Williams clearing and heard the sound of a child's voice singing near the remote well. When they drew closer, they saw Martha Williams standing at its edge, lowering what looked like a bundle of cloth tied to a rope. The song she sang was not in English or any language the men recognized. One hunter later said it felt less like a lullaby and more like a summons. When Martha saw them, she stopped instantly and stared at each man in silence with an expression that made them believe she knew something private and damning about every one of them. The hunters backed away without a word and never reported the matter formally, deciding it was safer not to intrude. But one of them confided the encounter to his cousin Dr. Miller, who added the account to his private file on the Williams family. After Miller's death in 1912, that file was discovered among his effects and remains the most complete record of the family's isolation and the growing strangeness that marked their lives. His notes include testimony of lights moving in deliberate patterns through the woods at night during 1875 and 1876. Strange activity that many locals quietly admitted seeing, but never spoke of in public. Strange sounds were often reported drifting from the Williams well through 1875 and 1876, sometimes described as humming or singing, other times like the grinding of unseen machinery. Neighbors began losing livestock with no tracks or blood to mark where the animals had gone. Most unsettling were repeated accounts of family members being spotted in two places at once, especially Martha, who was said to be at the cabin while also standing at the well within the same hour. The winter of 1875 into 1876 passed without official incident, though Josiah's purchases in town raised eyebrows. Merchant ledgers show he bought excessive amounts of lamp oil, salt, and heavy chains, far beyond what a normal household required. In the spring, Elizabeth reappeared in Eminence for the first time in nearly a year now, 17, and changed beyond recognition. Shopkeeper Mary Thornton recorded in her diary that the girl was taller, but moved with awkward stiffness as if her own body resisted her. Her skin had a translucent cast, and her eyes never seemed to focus directly, but instead fixed on something distant. When she spoke, her request for sewing needles came in a voice that carried a faint echo, as if two voices overlapped slightly out of sync. Thornton also noticed strange markings on Elizabeth's hands, dark branching lines, like veins outlined in blue-black beneath the skin. When asked, Elizabeth quickly hid her hands and murmured, "Only Thomas says the patterns help it find its way through us." Samuel, now 13, was also seen in town on occasion. Those who spoke with him remarked on his odd pauses in conversation, as if listening to someone no one else could hear. Abigail Foster, still worried for the boy's schooling, tried twice more in 1876 to visit the family, but was turned away by Josiah each time. He insisted Samuel was learning greater lessons than any book could teach. On her October visit, Foster heard voices rising from the root cellar, many speaking in unison, not in English or any language she recognized. Josiah dismissed it as Samuel practicing his letters with Elizabeth, though Foster swore there were more than two voices. That November, a hunter named Jeremiah Collins wandered near the Williams land while tracking game and found Samuel alone at a stream. The boy stood so still, it seemed unnatural, his eyes glazed with a shifting film like oil on water. When Collins asked if he had seen a wounded deer pass, Samuel replied, "It went to the well. Everything goes to the well eventually. The water below is hungry." Collins followed the trail, but it vanished at the clearing where the well stood. As he drew closer, he felt a crushing pressure as though dropping in altitude and heard a low hum vibrating up from the ground. He turned back in fear, but later confessed to Dr. Miller that for weeks he dreamed of approaching the well again, only to see pale hands reaching upward, each with too many fingers. Through 1877 and 1878, the Williams family remained in isolation, their only trace in local records being Josiah's monthly trips into town for supplies. County tax records from the late 1870s show that Josiah Williams always paid on time, but never in coins or paper like other men. Instead, he brought in small gold nuggets, claiming he pulled them from a stream on his property. Yet surveys of the region revealed no trace of gold, making his explanation unlikely at best. In the summer of 1879, Deputy Robert Hayes, troubled by persistent rumors, conducted his own quiet survey of the Williams homestead. From a hidden vantage point, he watched for hours, noting in his journal that Josiah and his son Samuel were working on an addition to the cabin, while Martha moved back and forth every hour carrying covered buckets from the direction of the well. Elizabeth was nowhere in sight. What struck Hayes most was the silence. There were no chickens, no hogs, no animals of any kind. Wildlife thrived up to the edge of the property, but never crossed into it, and birdsong died within 20 yards of the clearing. As dusk fell, Hayes saw a strange light rising from the well, clearing a pale blue-white glow like foxfire, but brighter and diffuse, spreading as though the ground itself were lit from beneath. He did not dare approach, overcome by the creeping certainty that unseen eyes were watching him. The drought of 1880 brought the Williams well to wider attention. While streams and springs across Shannon County dried to dust, Josiah's well poured forth water in endless supply, which he now sold at steep prices in town. Buyers noticed peculiar qualities. The water stayed cool for days, without ice, left no mineral residue when boiled, and quenched thirst with less than ordinary water. Dr. Miller secured a sample and tested it. By every measure, it was water, yet it resisted freezing, forming a crystalline lattice that remained partly liquid even in bitter cold. Most unsettling were its effects on plants. Vegetation grew with abnormal speed, but its roots coiled in spirals rather than sinking downward, as if confused by gravity itself. Desperate for relief in the drought, farmer Ezekiel Thompson begged Josiah for direct access to the well. Josiah refused with uncharacteristic anger, warning that the path was guarded by things that would strike at strangers. Since the family kept no dogs or livestock, this answer only deepened suspicion. In September 1880, Thompson persuaded blacksmith Harold Jenkins and storekeeper William Pierce to go with him to investigate while Josiah was known to be in town. The men's testimony, locked away for decades and only revealed in 1957, described what they found when they crept toward the homestead from the North Ridge, careful to stay out of sight. Roughly 200 yards from the Williams cabin, the men heard singing. It was a woman's voice, soft but unsettling, weaving through tones that slipped away from any hymn or folk tune they knew. The melody bent in unnatural ways that made listening almost painful. They followed the sound to a clearing, where they found Martha Williams, standing at the edge of a stone well about 4 feet across its lining, made of dark rock not native to the Ozarks. She was lowering a small cloth-wrapped bundle into the opening with a rope, and the bundle shifted as if something alive were inside. When she saw the intruders, Martha stopped her song at once. Her face showed no fear and no anger, only a calm that struck them as worse than either. She looked at them steadily and said, "He needs his feeding," before turning back toward the cabin without another word. Jenkins wanted to inspect the well, but the look on Martha's face convinced them otherwise. As they retreated, Pierce swore he heard a low humming rise from the depths, though the others claimed to hear nothing. The three men agreed they would never speak of what they had witnessed, though none of them could explain why the promise felt so necessary. That silence held for only a few days. After too much whiskey at the tavern, Pierce told the story to anyone who would listen. By morning, he was found collapsed outside a store, dazed and muttering the same phrase again and again. "It knows we saw." Dr. Miller examined him, but found no cause for his condition, noting only that Pierce's pupils were blown wide and unresponsive to light. He recovered within days, but claimed to remember nothing, not the incident, not even the visit to the Williams property. Years later, when Dr. Pritchard interviewed the elderly Ezekiel Thompson, he pressed for why the men had remained so quiet. Thompson replied simply, "Some things aren't meant for explaining." After that day, we knew the Williams were to be left alone. He went on to say that there are places in the hills where the earth feels wrong underfoot and the air hangs heavier than it should. Places the old folks always warned us to avoid. We should have remembered. Thompson also confessed a detail left out of the sworn testimony. As the three men left the property, all of them felt something following close behind, though nothing showed when they turned to look. The presence vanished only when they crossed the creek that marked the boundary. It was there that Jenkins discovered an unfamiliar stone in his pocket, dark with pale veins that seemed to shift when not directly observed. Disturbed, he hurled it into the creek. Thompson remembered the water reacting strangely, rippling too slowly, thick like syrup rather than clear stream water. From that time on, mentions of the Williams family in community records grew fewer, as if the town collectively agreed to look away. Even so, small notes survive. One shopkeeper's wife wrote that the Williams girl now walks stiffly, her movements awkward, and when she did speak, it sounded as though the words came from somewhere deeper than her throat. Mary Thornton recorded a detail in her private diary that she omitted from her public accounts. When Elizabeth reached for her purchases, her hands were no longer the hands of a girl. Her fingers were stretched unnaturally long with extra joints, and her skin had become translucent, showing faint movements beneath that matched no human anatomy. When Mary Thornton gasped at the sight of Elizabeth's altered hands, the girl quickly drew on her gloves and whispered, "We are changing to better hear what speaks from below." After that, Samuel, now 17, stopped appearing in town with his father altogether, and Elizabeth was seen only once more in the spring of 1881, when she accompanied Josiah to buy staggering quantities of salt and lamp oil. She was heard to murmur, "Thomas changed first and shows us the way." That July, County Assessor Victor Holloway made his biennial visit to update the tax rolls. His official record was sparse, noting only that the family had expanded their cabin with a new underground addition. Yet his personal journal, later donated by his daughter to the Missouri Historical Society, revealed far more troubling details. He described the homestead as neglected, the fields only half tended, the livestock gone despite prior registration of cows and chickens. The addition to the cabin was a deep cellar reached through a heavy trap door in the main floor. Josiah looked aged far beyond his years, his skin gray and his body gaunt. When asked about his health, he answered only that he carried the weight of necessary knowledge. Martha stood by the hearth, but never spoke, never moved. Neither Elizabeth nor Samuel were seen, and the youngest Thomas, who should have been 8 by then, was absent entirely. From beneath the trap door, Holloway heard a steady scraping sound, a rhythm too deliberate to be dismissed as settling timbers. When he asked to inspect the cellar for valuation, Josiah grew agitated, insisting that what's below stays below, and even offering to pay extra tax if Holloway left it sealed. As the assessor prepared to depart, he saw a figure watching from the tree line 50 yards away, unnaturally tall and thin, long hair falling to its shoulders, possibly female, but wrong in proportion. When Holloway mentioned it aloud, Josiah appeared alarmed, rushed him to his horse, and pressed a smooth stone into his hand. "Carry this until you cross the creek," he urged. "It remembers you've been here and won't follow if you hold it." Holloway humored him and carried the stone until reaching the boundary. Examining it, he saw pale veins that seemed to shift when viewed at an angle. Uneasy, he dropped it into the water and rode on. He never returned to the Williams place. For 2 assessment cycles after his reports, claimed the property inaccessible due to weather before his retirement. In a private letter later uncovered by Dr. Pritchard, he left one warning for his successor: accept payment without inspection. Some thresholds once crossed allow passage in both directions. Between 1882 and 1887, Josiah continued his monthly trips into eminence. But he was no longer the tidy, polite man of years past. Witnesses described him as shabby and withdrawn, selling furniture so crude and poorly made it barely covered costs, while still buying excessive supplies of lamp oil, salt, and chain lengths far beyond household use. He no longer sold water, muttering that the well had taken on a taste unfit for others. Around this same period, tragedies struck nearby families. Between 1883 and 1886, 3 children vanished from neighboring farms, each last seen heading in the general direction of the Williams property. At the time, no connection was made, but decades later, Dr. Pritchard tied their disappearances to the growing shadow over the family at the Western Ridge. Search parties were assembled to look for the missing children, but the Williams property was deliberately excluded. Sheriff Kincaid later claimed it was a matter of respecting private boundaries, though several searchers admitted there was an unspoken understanding that some places were better left undisturbed. None of the children were ever found. Only a single item surfaced: a child's ribbon discovered at the creek that marked the Williams boundary. The fabric seemed fused into the surface of a stone, as though the rock itself had grown around it. In 1884, Dr. Miller tried once more to reach Josiah, expressing concern for the family's health as their isolation deepened and Josiah's own appearance worsened. His notes record that Josiah met his inquiries with hostility, saying, "What flows through my family now is not for your understanding. Your medicines would only dilute what must remain pure." When Miller pressed about the children, Josiah answered that Elizabeth had adapted completely. Samuel was resisting what he would eventually accept, and Thomas had changed first and shown the way. The statements baffled Miller, but left him deeply uneasy. His final entry regarding the family, dated November 1884, described a chance encounter at Thompson's General Store. Josiah's decline was unmistakable. His skin had grown translucent, his movements stiff as though his bones no longer fit his body. When his sleeve shifted, Miller glimpsed his forearm. The skin rippled on its own, and the veins beneath branched in unnatural patterns, unlike human anatomy. When Miller urged a medical examination, Josiah's reply was chillingly lucid. "Doctor, your knowledge extends only to bodies that function as they always have. My family is learning to function as they never have before. The water from below changes us, yes, but change is merely evolution accelerated." Thomas understood first. Elizabeth embraced it willingly. Samuel still struggles, but thirst will overcome him. Only Martha and I remain in the old form, and only through vigilance. Realizing he had spoken too freely, Josiah left at once, abandoning his purchases. Miller noted that his parting words haunted him most. When the well is opened completely, distance will mean nothing. It will flow wherever it wishes, and all waters will carry its voice. In December 1887, after a snowstorm sealed off much of Shannon County for nearly 2 weeks, Reverend Isaiah Blackwood led a group to check on outlying farms. At the Williams homestead, they found no tracks in the snow around the cabin, yet smoke curled from the chimney. Blackwood wrote in his church record that after repeated knocking, Josiah finally appeared at the door. He refused to let them enter, insisting his family was healthy and needed nothing. Reverend Blackwood later recorded that Josiah's clothing was damp and carried a mineral odor like the sulfur springs to the south. One member of the party thought he heard chains shifting beneath the floor, though this was left out of the official church report and only surfaced years later in Dr. Pritchard's interviews. Blackwood's private journal, discovered after his death in 1902, contained even more unsettling details. He noted that Josiah's eyes had taken on a strange clarity, luminous in the dim light. When pressed about his family, Josiah spoke in phrases that skirted meaning but never fully explained. They're deeper in understanding now, and Thomas shows us the way down. When asked directly about the infant, Josiah corrected him. Not an infant for many years now. Thomas grows differently than expected. Blackwood also wrote of a fleeting glimpse into the cabin where a figure too tall and ill-proportioned for a child shifted in the shadows. Its motions were both jerking and fluid, something human and not human at once. When asked who else was present, Josiah closed the door partway and said, "Only family remains. What's in the well has made sure of that." As the Reverend departed, he saw a phenomenon that left him shaken. Though snow blanketed the forest, a path stretched from the cabin to the clearing where the well lay a quarter-mile away. It bore no footprints, but remained bare of snow, as though the earth itself radiated heat. Blackwood later voiced his concerns to Sheriff Kincaid, but no action was taken. In January 1888, he tried to form a prayer circle for the Williams family, but not one parishioner agreed evidence of the community's unspoken decision to leave the family alone. Throughout 1888, Josiah's appearances in town grew erratic. Months would pass without a visit. Then he would appear several times in quick succession. Witnesses described his worsening state, emaciated his skin, discolored his movements, halting as though his body no longer obeyed him. He refused all offers of help. In March 1889, during what became his final visit to Eminence, his behavior unsettled everyone who saw him. He entered Thompson's general store drenched to the bone, despite clear skies, and demanded enormous amounts of salt, more than the shop even carried. When told this, he grew frantic, muttering that the barrier weakens without it, and what comes through must be contained. Clerk Jonathan Hayes recalled that Josiah spoke to himself constantly in broken fragments, brushing his trembling hands against a riverstone pendant around his neck, its pale veining shifting unnaturally in the lamplight. Before leaving, Josiah seized Hayes by the wrist with startling strength and spoke with sudden clarity. "When they find us gone, they will look below. Tell them not to follow the tunnel to its end. What waits there is older than this land, older than any land. It wears us like clothing and learns our shape, and it is so very hungry for new voices." Josiah then departed and was never seen in town again. The next month brought the final account. In April 1889, a traveling peddler named Michael Collins stopped at the Williams place. Finding the cabin silent, but showing signs of habitation, he explored the property and came upon the well in its clearing. He later testified to the sheriff that he was drawn there by a deep humming, almost a moan, rising from the earth. Peering down, he thought he saw something stir. Lowering his lantern by rope, he caught sight of a pale shape moving below, neither man nor animal. Its limbs too long, its joints bending wrong, retreating into darkness. Collins fled at once to Eminence to report what he had seen. Collins's statement contained details later struck from official records, but preserved in Dr. Pritchard's notes. He insisted the movement below was unlike anything living. It flowed rather than crawled, not liquid, but not solid either, with too many limbs that bent in impossible ways. Worst of all was the face, or what passed for one. The features were in the right places, yet wrong in a way he could not describe. It looked up at him, smiling with far too many teeth, and spoke his name, though he had never given it. Despite his reluctance, Sheriff Thomas Kincaid organized a 3-man search the following day. At the Williams property, they found the cabin door hanging open, signs of a sudden departure, and inside little more than the ordinary clutter of frontier life. But in the new section, they uncovered a trap door, secured with heavy locks. Breaking it open revealed a narrow tunnel burrowing toward the well. The sheriff's report recorded nothing unusual, claiming the tunnel contained no people or remains. Yet his private letter to the county judge, later uncovered by Dr. Pritchard, told another story. The passage extended 200 yards underground before opening into a chamber carved painstakingly over years. There were signs of habitation, bedding, clothing, personal items, as if someone had lived in confinement. Chains were bolted to the walls, and the stone was covered with markings that weren't letters, but strange designs that unsettled the eye. A narrow shaft connected the chamber to the bottom of the well. What they found in the well defied explanation. The liquid inside stretched to unknown depths, but was not water. It burned the skin on contact, gave off no vapor even when exposed to flame, and refused to reflect light. Objects dropped within vanished without a sound. Around its edge lay bundles wrapped in cloth. Some fresh, others decayed offerings like those described in earlier testimony. Deputy Hayes remarked that the stones lining the well had not been placed, but grown fused together without seams, their surface smooth to the touch, though rough to the eye. Most disturbing was a journal discovered in a small alcove, carved into the chamber wall, written in Martha Williams's hand. The entries alternated between ordinary domestic notes and passages in a script no one recognized. The English portions describe the gradual transformation of the children, first Thomas, then Elizabeth, then Samuel, in a process she called the adaptation. The final legible entry, dated roughly a week before the search, read, "Josiah resists. Still, though he brings the offerings as required." He does not understand that resistance only prolongs the process. What comes through the well cannot be stopped now that it has tasted us. The children have shown me the beauty in surrender. Soon we will all be suitable vessels. All 3 investigators suffered strange symptoms during their time below: dizziness, blurred vision, and a pressure at the base of the skull, as though something sought to enter. These sensations grew stronger the nearer they stood to the well, and lingered long after they had fled the property. The Williams family was gone, their departure no more than a day old. The sheriff ordered the tunnel collapsed and the well sealed with concrete. In his closing statement, he urged that all records of the investigation remain restricted to prevent panic, that the land be quarantined, and that no future settlement be permitted on that cursed ridge. What Sheriff Kincaid withheld, even from his confidential report, revealed only decades later in Dr. Pritchard's interview with the sheriff's son, was what happened as the men began sealing the well. When the first bucket of concrete was poured, a sound, like hundreds of voices crying in unison, rose from the depths. The clear liquid surged upward against gravity, stretching into tendrils that reached for the men. For a moment, one of these shapes formed a child's face, disturbingly similar to a daguerreotype of young Thomas Williams, later found in the cabin. The face spoke words in no language known, then dissolved as the concrete struck it, and the surface collapsed. Within 3 months of the investigation, Kincaid resigned and left Missouri for Kansas, leaving no address. His deputy, Robert Hayes, assumed the role of sheriff, and by June 1889, ordered all records of the Williams case sealed. The property reverted to county control after taxes went unpaid and was left abandoned. But those who had taken part in the investigation did not emerge unchanged. One man was plagued by dreams of looking out through unfamiliar eyes from beneath dark water. Con Kincaid himself, according to his son, developed translucent patches of skin veined in unnatural branching patterns. He concealed them carefully and insisted he be buried rather than cremated, saying only that the earth must contain what he had become. In 1902, the county ordered a controlled burn to clear the ridge, but witnesses swore the fire recoiled from the well clearing. Flames that licked across the forest split apart at its edge and flowed around it like water around stone. When workers tried pushing burning brush into the clearing, the embers died instantly, as if smothered by something unseen. One forester, Joseph Matz, wrote privately to a friend that he heard laughter as they left, not human laughter, but a sound like water learning to mock. For the next 20 years, the land lay untouched. Local maps left the area blank, though it bordered hunting grounds and logging roads. Folklore rose in whispers about the place where the well waits, but the facts of the Williams family faded, whether by design or the natural erosion of memory. Yet strange reports continued. In 1916, a hunting party became disoriented near the site, losing hours without recall, while somehow traveling miles. In the days that followed, all four men developed an unquenchable thirst, an aversion to sunlight, and symptoms a local physician dismissed as nervous exhaustion. One of the hunters later reported finding a smooth stone with shifting veins in his pocket, though he had no memory of picking it up. He threw it into the current river, and that winter the river froze in strange patterns despite unseasonably mild weather. In 1927, a civilian Conservation Corps survey team scouting the ridge for possible development reported stumbling upon the Williams well, its concrete seal broken. Though nothing of this appears in official records, 3 members of the crew soon requested transfers, and the development plans were abandoned without explanation. In 1932, a man named Edward Burnett, who had been involved with surveying work in the Ozarks, died under disturbing circumstances at a state hospital in Farmington. Dr. Pritchard later reviewed his case notes. Burnett had been plagued by auditory hallucinations of voices rising from underground and a fixed belief that something inside his body was reorganizing him. He claimed all water carried voices and that he was still in contact with Thomas Williams, who had fully transformed and now acted as a conduit between worlds. Nursing notes describe Burnett's gradual physical changes, joints growing unnaturally flexible, his skin taking on a translucent cast, and veins branching in abnormal patterns. At his death, the cause was listed as heart failure, but the physician remarked on unusual postmortem traits. Rigor mortis was delayed, and movement beneath the skin appeared much earlier than decomposition could explain. An orderly later added that when Burnett's body was washed, the water slid across his skin in patterns, before dispersing as though refusing normal surface tension. In 1938, a University of Missouri geological team mapped the county's water table and recorded a striking anomaly near the old Williams land. Their instruments detected a funnel-shaped depression in the water table perfectly centered on the site of the well. The lead geologist, Dr. Samuel Winters, noted that such a formation contradicted every known hydrological principle. When the team attempted to probe deeper, their instruments failed, and the crew suffered shared hallucinations, disorientation, and the sound of voices murmuring in unison beneath their feet. The survey was halted, and the anomaly dismissed as a product of mineral interference. But Winters did not let it go. His private correspondence, archived, but restricted until 1980, shows he pursued the mystery for years. In a 1944 letter to a colleague at Harvard, he confessed, "The incident in Shannon County continues to disturb my scientific understanding. Water should not behave as it did there. I have begun to believe we did not encounter water at all, but something that mimicked its properties while maintaining entirely different molecular behavior. The implications are staggering. If such a substance could disguise itself while altering atomic bonds, the potential applications would be revolutionary. Yet I cannot shake the sense that what flows beneath that ground is not passive matter awaiting discovery, but a presence with agency and intent. Dr. Samuel Winters abandoned his academic career soon after his private letter citing poor health. His journal, recovered after his death in 1951, revealed symptoms like those reported by others who had come too near the Williams well: chronic thirst, extreme sensitivity to light, and the constant sensation of something moving beneath his skin along the pathways of his veins. A decade later, Dr. Lawrence Pritchard's final notes, dated October 1961, added a darker coda. He had traced the surviving relatives of the Williams neighbors and found an elderly woman in Springfield, the niece of Ezekiel Thompson. She repeated a story her uncle had told only once before his death. Uncle Zeke said he knew why Josiah dug the well where he did. According to him, Josiah admitted that their firstborn child before Elizabeth had been buried there after dying in infancy. 3 nights later, Josiah claimed he heard crying from the grave. When he exhumed it, the coffin was empty, though the crying still came deeper underground. He dug for days until he struck water. But what rose up was not water, and what stared back at him was not his child, though it called him father. When Thompson asked what it was, Josiah said only that it was something that had been here long before men, something not meant to be found. The niece recalled that her uncle developed peculiar habits for the rest of his life. He drank only from running streams and always spilled the first portion onto the earth as though feeding it. He refused mirrors-covered windows at night and carried a veined river stone in his pocket at all times, replacing it if lost. He told her that Josiah had confessed to building the Missouri well because it needed to be fed. His exact words were, "It remembers me," and that's better than being forgotten. Pritchard's research ended abruptly in December 1961, when he took leave from the university and never returned. By 1962, his collection on the Williams case was sealed by the Missouri Historical Society, under the pretense of preservation, though no conservation issues were documented. The archivist who processed the collection, Margaret Wilson, later admitted to finding a sealed envelope among the materials addressed to whoever continues this research. Policy required her to open it. She told a graduate student in 1965 that what she read on that single handwritten page disturbed her so deeply, she resealed it and deliberately misfiled it so it could never be found. Wilson soon requested a transfer from archives, citing health concerns. Her medical records later described parasomnia, vascular hallucinations, and the same crawling sensations beneath the skin reported by Winters and others. Her psychiatrist noted her repeated claim that it gets in through the water, but it's not the water. When asked about the document, she had found Margaret Wilson would only say it contained a warning and a set of coordinates numbers she committed to memory, so she would know what to avoid for the rest of her life. She told her physician, "It's something in the water that learns to become you from the inside out." And it's patient. So patient. I haven't had a drink in 3 days, but I can still feel it moving inside me, mapping my vessels, learning the pathways of my body. It's been hiding in that well for so long, but it's found other ways out now. The Williams family was just the beginning. Wilson was eventually institutionalized, where she died in 1971 of dehydration brought on by self-imposed water restriction. In 1968, during the construction of a Forestry Service road near the old Williams site, workers uncovered a stone-lined shaft. The county report described it simply as a defunct well filled for safety. Yet One worker told a newspaper reporter the liquid at the bottom was clear as glass, but heavy as mercury. When he pulled his measuring line up, it came back dry, too clean, as if nothing had touched it. Within a month, all 6 men who handled the site had quit the Forestry Service, and follow-up attempts to locate them failed. The road was quietly rerouted half a mile with no explanation. 2 years later, survey maps labeled the area unstable ground, though no supporting data was filed. By 1971, water disturbances spread across Shannon County. Springs ran dry or flowed irregularly. Wells produced less water. In some cases, clear liquid seeped from bare soil carrying a sharp odor. Officials blamed seasonal fluctuation, though the weather was stable that year. 3 residents were hospitalized with strange symptoms: relentless thirst, distorted vision, and the sensation of something crawling beneath their skin. All 3 reported drinking from private wells in the Western Hills. Lab analysis of water samples found nothing unusual. Yet technicians noted the samples defied storage conditions, staying cool in warm rooms and warm in cold ones. The patients were transferred out of county facilities. No follow-up exists, though one nurse left a cryptic note: "Patient reports voices from faucet at night calling my name and promising transformation." The Williams homestead itself has since been erased from official maps. Modern charts place nothing in its place but the vast Mark Twain National Forest. Internal memoranda released in 1978 through Freedom of Information requests revealed an unwritten Forest Service policy instructing rangers to discourage hikers from certain unmarked sections of the Western Forest with no explanation given. In 1982, University of Missouri archaeology student Robert Chen set out to locate the Williams site as part of his study of frontier settlements. He cross-referenced landmarks from Pritchard's papers and narrowed down a probable location. 3 weeks later, he vanished. His abandoned camp was found near the ridge, and among his belongings were field notes filled with disturbing observations located probable Williams homestead based on triangulation from surviving landmarks mentioned in Pritchard's papers. Chen's field notes grew increasingly erratic in their final days. He recorded finding foundation stones consistent with 19th century construction, along with soil subsidence where the cabin's addition once stood. Most disturbing was the discovery of a circular stone structure 250 yards from the site, matching descriptions of the well. Though partially collapsed, its opening remained visible. No water showed at the surface, but a weighted line dropped inside fell at least 40 feet before striking resistance. Chen noted not the sound of water, but a low rhythmic vibration that could be felt through the ground. His equipment failed repeatedly in the vicinity. By the 3rd day, Chen had located the tunnel leading from the cabin's foundation toward the well, partially caved in, but still passable. On the 4th day, he described reaching the chamber, detailed in the sheriff's private account. The wall markings remained the weathered, shifting patterns that unsettled the eye when not viewed directly. He reported severe headaches, auditory hallucinations of distant voices in unison, and something moving in the well, solid yet fluid. A lowered camera came back ruined film, exposed despite protective casing. At night he wrote of scratching sounds around his tent and the sense of being watched. On the 7th day, his notes described dreams of voices calling him by name, and a strange clear liquid seeping from the ground near his camp that burned on contact but left no trace. The tunnel he discovered extended deeper than any historical record suggested. In a lower chamber, walls appeared scraped by something with multiple points of contact. Clothing was found embedded in the stone itself, not deposited, but grown over as if the rock had swallowed it. His final entry, dated the 8th day, shifted from observation to confession. "I understand now why they stayed, why they changed. It's beautiful once you stop fighting. What What waits below is older than humanity, older than the ground itself. It wears us as we wear clothing. I've seen Thomas. He's still here, still changing, still becoming. The entry ends mid-word, his pen dragging off the page. Chen was never found. Despite extensive searches, his body vanished without trace. The official report blamed an animal attack, but investigators noted compass malfunctions, radios failing, and batteries drained near the site. One searcher, years later, admitted they found his camp intact, as if he had simply stepped away. With dozens of river stones laid in a spiral outside his tent, their veins shifting when seen from the corner of the eye. Several team members claimed they heard their own names whispered from the direction of the well, while others felt things moving beneath their skin. In 1987, hunters stumbled across human remains 3 miles from the suspected Williams property. Forensic testing identified them as an adult male, but the skeleton bore abnormalities that defied explanation. The examiner wrote that the bone structure suggested either extreme deformity or post-mortem alteration. Early DNA analysis proved inconclusive, and with no family to claim them, the remains were buried in an unmarked grave. A full version of the examiner's report, released only through a 1995 FOIA request, detailed features absent from official summaries. The skeleton displayed patterns wholly inconsistent with any known human variation. The forensic report on the remains found in 1987 noted abnormalities no medical literature could explain. The long bones of the arms and legs bore additional articulation points like extra joints. The skull contained unexplained openings at its base, and the spine showed 7 additional vertebrae of unusual shape. Soil samples from the body revealed traces of a viscous clear substance that resisted analysis. The examiner recommended further study by specialists in comparative anatomy, but no record of such research exists. The last documented case tied to the Williams story came in 1995 when a family hiking in the western Mark Twain National Forest became lost overnight near a stone circle half sunken in the ground. They later told rangers they heard voices calling from below, and their 6-year-old daughter spoke with the people under the stones. The parents were treated for dehydration, and the report filed without follow-up. In the days after their return, both mother and father developed the familiar symptoms: chronic thirst sensitivity to light and vision disturbances. The mother's private journal, shared with researchers years later, describes the most chilling change. "Emily speaks differently now," she wrote. "Her vocabulary is far beyond her age. One night I found her in the bathroom speaking to her reflection, but the reflection's mouth didn't move with hers. When I asked who she was talking to, she said, 'Thomas says not to worry. The changing doesn't hurt once you stop fighting it.' We've never known anyone named Thomas." The family soon relocated to Colorado and could not be traced further. Their physician later confirmed only that their medical records had been transferred to a facility specializing in rare disorders. Rangers who patrol that section of forest whisper about dead zones, where wildlife never strays, plants grow too thick, and compasses falter. Some admit they are told unofficially during training to avoid stone circles, especially those resembling old wells. A retired ranger interviewed in 2005 recalled an encounter in 1998. He saw a figure watching from the tree line, tall beyond human proportion, its movements too fluid, bending at too many joints. When he called out, it slipped back into the forest, leaving behind not footprints, but a seep of clear liquid that crept uphill against gravity. Shaken, he requested reassignment the next day. In retirement, he was haunted by dreams of water speaking through every faucet and puddle, urging him to surrender to the deeper currents. What remains undisputed is that once on the western ridge of the Ozarks, there stood a cabin, and beside it, a well. a well whose contents were never water and whose influence has never been contained. Whether it was truly sealed or whether what lived within it still moves beneath the ground is a question best left unanswered. But for those who dismiss it as folklore, one last detail lingers in the county record. In 1968, someone broke into the Shannon County Courthouse and stole only a single document, the deed to Josiah Williams's land. The thief was never identified. The night watchman swore he saw a tall, impossibly thin figure slipping out of the building and vanishing into the earth itself, leaving behind nothing but a small puddle of clear liquid. By morning, it had already evaporated. The county clerk who uncovered the courthouse theft later found a smooth river stone with shifting veins resting on his desk, though he had no memory of ever picking it up. Within a week, he had taken extended leave, his physician noting constant thirst and the sensation of something crawling along his veins. He never returned to his post. Admitted eventually to a care facility in Springfield, he refused all water for the last 3 days of his life, repeating only, "It's in the water." But it's not the water. It's what the water becomes when it learns to think. The Williams well lingers in Ozark history, not because it was explained, but because it never could be. It speaks to the limits of what we're willing to understand. Some truths aren't hidden by lack of evidence, but by their very nature too heavy, too strange to face. Still, every few years, someone in Shannon County reports the same things, a hum rising from deep in the forest, or a clear liquid seeping from ground that should be dry. Officials dismiss it as natural springs or superstition. Rangers discourage hikers from wandering too far west in the Mark Twain National Forest, warning of sinkholes and unstable ground. Perhaps they are right to do so, because some secrets are best left sealed. Some wells are better left forgotten. In the silent hollows of the Ozark Mountains, something may still be waiting. Something that knows the taste of human attention and grows stronger every time its story is told. So, if you walk those hills, tread carefully. Listen for the sound beneath your feet. Sometimes the earth rings hollow as though waiting. And if you hear humming rise from below, do not linger. Do not search. And above all, if you find a clearing where nothing grows, where the air presses down like a weight and the ground feels expectant, do not dig. Some wells reach down to water. Others reach much, much deeper.